What's up everyone, Alex here. So this week a whole bunch of previews for Final Fantasy XVI came out, and along with it, there was an interview with Naoki Yoshida, who is the producer of the game, who talked about the term JRPG, which seems to be a very hot topic within our community. Now, normally I don't like bringing these up. I'd like to bring some happiness and joy to your day, so I'm gonna do my best to be more diplomatic about this compared to my peers. And before you keyboard jockeys out there compose something as a response to like the thumbnail or the title, whatever it's gonna be, I encourage you to watch the entire video. I'm gonna read a summary from RPG site that does a really good job of encapsulating everything that Naoki Yoshida said. Interpreting for Yoshida, Final Fantasy XIV and XVI translation lead, Koji Fox, shared that the development team does not develop games with a thought process that they are quote-unquote JRPGs, just RPGs. This then goes a step further, saying that the term itself is purely a distinction that they feel has been used exclusively by Western media, rather than any users or media in Japan. Even worse, the term itself seems to strike a nerve with some of the members of the development team, due to associations with how the term has been used in the past. This is going to depend on who you ask, he specified, but there was a time when this term first appeared 15 years ago, and for us as developers, the first time we heard it, it was like a discriminatory term. The suggestion is that at the time, the term JRPG was used to silo off Japanese RPGs from other RPGs in the West, often to negative effect. Furthermore, Yoshida and team don't set out to create a game that fits the more narrow definition of a JRPG. They want to make broad RPGs in line with all of the rest of the wider genre. SkillUp, who conducted the interview, then notes that Yoshida was quick to acknowledge that nowadays the usage of the term has been far more positive, but also that he feels that there are still a lot of developers in Japan that remember feeling that the terminology itself was overly restricting, and triggers bad feelings for those that were around when the term was first coined. Now, Naoki Yoshida got a lot of flack for this statement, but there have been a lot of people on the internet that have actually found very similar interviews with other game developers. Like this one from Tetsuya Takahashi, who of course recently released Xenoblade Chronicles 3. This interview was conducted 10 years ago. Lately, I feel that in the rest of the world, branding Japanese-made RPGs as JRPGs has become a form of mockery. It is certainly true that there are many games that, as the critics say, have given up on trying to evolve. On the other hand, it's also true that there are lots of Japanese-made RPGs that, like Japanese cars and Japanese electronics, have had tremendous care put into their development, in aspects like their user interfaces, their control schemes, and that those aspects are something that Japanese people can take pride in. And if you follow this Twitter thread, which I'm actually linking in the description of this video, there's a lot of people who have found other interviews from either the same development team or others that kind of support this assertion. While there have been a plethora of different reactions towards this news, I personally thought that it really sucks for developers to actually feel this way. And then when I really started thinking about what era this all happened, like Naoki Yoshida said it was 15 years ago, and of course Tetsuya Takahashi said this 10 years ago, I remember that this happened back in the PS3 and 360 era. I know that it's been a while, but for those who may not have remembered, this was a time when a lot of crazy things happened in the Western media, where Japanese games have been looked down upon because of the rise in popularity of Western video games, like Call of Duty and a whole bunch of shooters like it. And the prevailing thought from the Western community is that just because Japan isn't on the cutting edge and the bleeding edge of technology, that they're kind of slacking of sorts and wasn't really worth taking seriously. Which of course led to their assertion that somehow console gaming was going to die because it was antiquated, and that hardcore gamers were going to move to PC gaming and all the casuals are going to go to mobile gaming. And of course, 13 or so odd years later, we know that obviously that's not the truth. Heck, back then I didn't even believe this assertion and just kind of laughed at all this. But for my part, when I saw the news, I didn't think like, oh, I need to disprove it. Like, oh, this is just like an isolated incident. Because while people will say that this is some sort of like weird promotional gimmick or whatnot, we also need to take the stance of, well, this is how they felt, right? And the fact that Tetsuya Takahashi even said this 10 years ago, many, many years removed from whatever he's working on right now, which, admittedly, he's also promoting Xenoblade at the time. What they felt is how they felt. Trying to bring in multiple Japanese developers is not going to disprove the fact that these people felt that way. And I personally think that trying to either ignore or disprove this is a form of gaslighting. And that term has been kind of used a lot in the West recently. So for folks who aren't familiar with the term, it's basically invalidating somebody's feelings, but kind of moving the viewport a little bit towards something else entirely. It's almost like a form of distraction in a way, which doesn't really address the person's feelings immediately. But that's to be expected, right? Some of us have kind of taken the term JRPG in a more positive light and seen it as a way to categorize a set of games that we've all come to know and love. Like, I've been using JRPG as long as I remember, and I've never really felt any sort of negativity towards it, even if the Western media used to use it as such. It's almost like a badge of honor. That being said, I do think that the term JRPG is just a small part of an even larger problem. Last year, I made a video proposing that we actually change the term JRPG to something like Japanese-style RPG, because a lot of people use JRPG to describe RPGs that came out from Japan. And I know that many of you use the term JRPG to describe a style of RPG that mirrors many games from that region, regardless of where it came from, but the confusion is still there. But moreover, I think it's also worth talking about game genres in general. When I take a look at different types of media, video game genres have a very specific problem unique to it. Like, if I think about music, TV, and movies, you can generally use one or two words to kind of sum up what that whole experience is gonna be. Like music, you have heavy metal, new wave, or whatever. TV, you have procedural comedies and whatnot. And then in movies, you have superhero films, that sort of thing. And all of these describe the quote-unquote narrative that happens within that medium, right? In video games, game genres have to do double duty, not only describing the narrative, but also the type of interaction involved. And while there have been genres that do this to great effect, right? Like survival horror, that's like a great summation of what survival horror is, like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, etc. How are you going to describe something like Leisure Suit Larry? Is it going to be like comedy, point-and-click adventure? Is it sexy, comedy, point-and-click adventure? So it's like both the interaction and the narrative theme have to be back-to-back. And yeah, I may be complaining the fact that like game genres are like 4 or 5 words long, but if the goal of game genres is to be a shorthand of what these games are, then I don't think it's sufficient enough, right? I mean, at this point, we're also creating genres like Metroidvania and roguelike. I know that roguelike has been around for years, but still, like, what if it's a comedy roguelike? You have to add the word comedy in front of it. What if it has action? What if it has like horror and, all that stuff? It's kind of crazy. And I think that's kind of like what made me make this video, is because while we're all going to come out of this conversation with very different opinions, I think the very first reaction that we all should have is empathy. Yes, obviously, we didn't know about the term JRPG being bad for developers, right? But even Yoshi P admits that there's a more positive connotation coming out of that. And for many of us, we see it as a badge of pride. Like, yes, we love JRPGs, to the point that many of us consider only turn-based Japanese RPGs as true JRPGs. And even at that point, I feel like it's so limiting. Now, admittedly, me and a whole bunch of content creator friends have been talking about this for quite a while now, ever since the news popped up. And we're not in a position to create solutions for this, right? It has to come organically within the community. But what is important to note is that regardless of what anyone thinks, how we feel about the term is the most important one. And with the added context here, I know that some of you have been riled up. You're like, oh man, I can't believe that happened back in the day. But it's history, right? It's ancient history, and that's how we learn from our mistakes, whether it was committed by us or someone else. Personally, it's my hope that in the future, we can figure out a better way to categorize games in better genres. But until then, I'm still going to be reviewing some really awesome games, discovering them and presenting them to you, and bringing the joy of games back to the community. Because at the end of the day, we're all playing this to have fun and enjoy wonderful experiences and share them with friends. This one fact about games will never change. Now that I've said all that, I want to hear what you think personally. I don't usually make these sorts of videos because, for one, I feel like they're outside of the perspective of the channel, because I want to bring happiness to your lives. But I felt that this was a big enough deal because the larger gaming community was talking about it, and I want to bring this up to you guys. And I hope that I talked about this very sensitive subject matter in a more diplomatic way than my peers. But I want to hear what you think first and foremost. Post your thoughts in the comments below, and let's talk about it. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.